A field of landmines greeted them. 3 soldiers were injured, one seriously, when their vehicle ran over one of them.
We don't know if it was a mine or what we struck, but we heard an explosion, hit my truck. Then I was still left in the vehicle. I staggered out, fell to the ground.
Iraqi fighters took up positions on rooftops, firing rocket-propelled grenades, and coalition forces responded with laser-guided bombs. Backup was called in the form of Kiowa helicopters, their aim to destroy Iraqi gun trucks found on a football field. Eventually, troops resorted to a grenade launcher to finish the job.
It looks like they came to play ball, you know, and hey, we're here for the whole 9 innings, so we'll see what happens.
This mission to secure cities around Baghdad, like Karbala, is an essential part of the coalition's war plan. Without it, their final push to gain full control of the capital would struggle to succeed. Sophie Hutchinson, BBC News.
Baghdad, tightening the noose around the city. Yesterday, these forces provided what the Americans called a poke in the eye to the Iraqi leadership with a thrust into Baghdad. A brigade combat team of 2,000 vehicles has crossed the Euphrates today, joining 2 other similar teams to the south and southwest of the city.
It's obviously there's many options open to us. They may very well decide to take it a piece at a time. They may very well look at the options. But I think in reality what they'd really like is for the Iraqi leadership to realise that the game is up, it's over, and to capitulate to save any further loss of civilian life.
Waiting for the Americans are the Iraqi defenders. Here, a group of Saddam's troops posing for the cameras on the wreckage of a US tank. The leader himself has once again appeared on Iraqi television. It's not certain when the footage was recorded, but it showed Saddam with his inner circle, including his sons and senior advisors, who are today still talking defiantly of progress.
This is the situation. Whenever we attack them, they retreat to the back. And when we pound them with missiles and heavy artillery, they retreat even deeper.
As well as the rhetoric, the leadership is taking precautions too. Iraqi state television has announced a travel ban in and out of the city between 6 p.m. and 6 a.m. Overnight, more pounding of Iraqi positions within Baghdad. The Americans can now provide air cover almost at will for any more advances on the ground. And on the streets of Baghdad today, the somewhat flimsy-looking defences of the Iraqi forces, bracing themselves as American troops mass in their thousands just a few miles away. James Helm, BBC News.
We attack them, they retreat to the back. And when we pound them with missiles and heavy artillery, they retreat even deeper. When we stop bombarding them, they pushed some of their units forward, and our armed forces had left the direction, the corridor, the direction, the way towards Saddam International Airport open to them. Because in this way, a good attrition to the enemy can be achieved there. So whenever our armed forces stop pounding them, they push their units forward near the area of Saddam Airport for propaganda purposes, as you have seen yesterday, have been shown in Al Jazeera and other, had been distributed, they said, by American news agency. I think it had been distributed by the Americans directly. And I replied to that. I said, this is not in the airport. Now I am explaining their tactics to you because this has been observed closely by our side. We push them, they run away to the back, we pounding them, they disappear in the depth back. When we stopped pounding them, they pushed some of their units towards Saddam International Airport. We noticed that those units only be filmed and for propaganda, hollow, empty propaganda purposes. In order to be accurate when we report to you, therefore I am explaining to you all these details.
Basra's burning, the horizon scarred by days of fighting as British Royal Marines fly in, ready for an assault on the Iraqi city. The troops take cover in the salt marshes on the outskirts of Basra. Close by, they've been told Iraqis with rocket-propelled grenades are waiting to strike. The British forces have ratcheted up the pressure here, matching the tightening of the American noose around Baghdad. But the Marines aren't complacent about the risks. They've been attacked already by Iraqis dressed in civilian clothing.
We had an IED, an improvised explosive device, thrown in over the wall, which took out quite a lot of the windows in the school building that we'd occupied.
Armoured vehicles spearheaded the move into Basra. For more than a week, British units had held off seizing the city, worried about civilian and military casualties. But today, their patience snapped.
These British troops believe that Basra's fate is now sealed. It's now a question of when it falls, not if.
And as reinforcements come in, some Marines are being flown out for a rest, exhausted after fighting in the furnace-like heat of the desert. The rising temperature over 100 degrees Fahrenheit again today. Another reason why the British decided they couldn't wait any longer. Jonathan Charles, BBC News, Basra.
The Desert Rats set out from a base on the southwest edge of the city in a convoy of tanks and armoured personnel carriers. They met isolated resistance as they moved into Basra, reaching a roundabout 3 miles in, which the army refer to as the Gates of Basra. One section of the convoy then moved still further in, attacking the Ba'ath Party headquarters in the heart of the city centre. That attack was followed by a second major offensive launched by Royal Marine Commandos. Tim Hewitt now reports.
The British tanks rolled out this morning, 2 weeks after laying siege to this city of 1 million people. From their positions on its outskirts, they rumbled through the city gates. Hundreds of tanks, armoured vehicles and fighting men of the Desert Rats. From the ground, they took out enemy positions. And from the air, they flew in reinforcements.
We had an IED, an improvised explosive device, thrown in over the wall, which took out quite a lot of the windows in the school building that we'd occupied.
Most of the resistance came from small arms fire, from radical militia dressed in civilian clothes. There seemed to be no cohesive fighting force here and no sign of the feared Republican Guard. Soldiers of the Irish Guards were soon out of their warrior fighting vehicles and on the streets for the first time. The road behind them littered with the shells of burnt-out Iraqi tanks. This was meant to be a lightning raid, but now they're here to stay, and it does appear that some of the locals at least are happy to see them, knowing that help and the end of an oppressive regime is on its way. By early afternoon, and flanked by helicopter gunships, British Challenger tanks had shot their way close to the city centre. They're now fortifying their positions and clearing away the last pockets of resistance. Tonight, the British control most of Basra, but not all of it. They think any significant opposition has been crushed, but they can't be sure. This remains a dangerous place for the troops to be. Tim Hewitt, ITV News, Basra.
Well, we got the orders to move this morning at around 7 o'clock time. We were told that they were going in at 9 o'clock in the morning, and that's when we started to roll. And you saw this impressive column of tanks move towards the city. And it's split into 3 different sections. The 1st Fusiliers battle group headed to the north of the city. The Black Watch headed to the centre, and they have stayed there, I understand. And the Scotch Dragoon Guards went to the south of the city. They're now all in place, and as I say, I don't think that anybody encountered resistance on the way. What we did see on the way, though, was a housing estate that we passed, just a small one with low-rise buildings, and apparently the soldiers said that there were people out waving white flags, obviously worried that they could be the targets of the soldiers as they drove past, and they wanted to show that they surrendered, they were on side. Then as they made their way up through the university complex, which we know has been used as cover by the militia, by the Fadaim, they went very, very carefully, and we saw bunkers where soldiers had obviously been dug in with sandbags on. As I say, we know that the area around there was mined, and we had to go carefully. They actually defused a tripwire they found across the road. They also found 3 missiles in one of the halls there. So we know that fighters had left booby traps there for the soldiers. They are moving very carefully because they don't quite know where their friends are and where their foes are. But by and large, I'd have to say this must go down as a successful day. They moved earlier than they anticipated, perhaps spurred by the success of the Americans in Baghdad, and they do by and large seem to have been made to feel welcome here.
A friendly fire disaster. This morning, an American bomb destroyed a convoy carrying high officials of the Kurdish Peshmerga forces, which have been fighting alongside the Americans on the northern front. At least 17 Kurdish commanders and their guards were killed, along with an interpreter working for the BBC. More than 40 were injured. The military chief of the Kurdish KDP, the brother of their leader Masoud Barzani, was gravely hurt. Trying to organize a northern front with just a few hundred US Special Forces troops and the poorly armed Kurdish Peshmerga guerrillas was always going to be a high-risk exercise. The idea was to open the way with heavy, sustained American bombing of Iraqi positions. But today, it all went disastrously wrong. Even as we filmed the wreckage, US jets were still dropping their bombs nearby. Giant explosions erupted down the road. Earlier, we had joined another convoy of US Special Forces troops and Kurdish fighters as they tried to move south through country abandoned by the Iraqi army. At first, all was calm. American troops controlled the operation from a rooftop. Then, as the Kurds advanced again, the Iraqis opened up. Now we're hearing the boom of Iraqi guns as they fire towards our positions. All morning, the Kurds have been trying to advance, and that was the shell going off. The Iraqi gunners rapidly found our range, and we took refuge in an abandoned farmhouse.
Get down. Get down!
We finally managed to get out by car. Here in the north, Iraqi tanks and guns are still firing, and the American effort is looking a little ragged. Julian Mannion, ITV News on the northern front.
The southern suburbs of Baghdad, the wreckage of an American Abrams tank. Ammunition rounds lie in the debris scattered in the battlefield of Al-Dura. In the propaganda war, it is an image Iraq is desperate for the world to see. The soldiers wasted little time expressing their anger. The Red Cross say around 100 Iraqi troops were admitted to hospitals every hour yesterday during the worst of the fighting. But all this general wanted to talk about was American casualties. The tank was hit by a rocket-propelled grenade, he said, and 4 Americans were killed. It is impossible to independently verify exactly what took place here. The Iraqis say they damaged this American Abrams tank during the battle for Al-Dura yesterday. They're keen to show it off and keen to show that they're still in charge in this part of Baghdad. We could see Iraqi forces here this morning, but they were still in the sights of the US military. Journalists ran for cover as American jets roared overhead. In the distance, the battle for Baghdad continued, and so too the casualties. The Iraqi positions around this motorway interchange appeared to have sustained many losses. I saw dozens of vehicles destroyed. This was the aftermath of an intense battle. The road around this part of the city was littered with burned-out wrecks for another 2 miles. The horror of what happened on these streets could be seen at every turn. But viewed from the Iraqi side, what's not so clear is how this battle is really unfolding. Neil Connery, ITV News, Baghdad.
Watch over southeastern Basra. The Queen's Dragoon Guards are given the go-ahead to check and clear an area further forward than any coalition troops have ventured into the city so far. The armoured recce vehicles of C Squadron churn up the dirt tracks of the marshland and head for their target. In less than half an hour, the outskirts of Basra are in view. The troops have been asked to check out 2 industrial compounds, which intelligence sources suggest have been used by enemy forces. At first sight, it looks as though they're abandoned now, but somebody didn't want us to go down here to check any further. Strewn across our path, more than 100 mines, anti-tank and anti-personnel. We're not going any further down this route.
Have a look, Mark.
The gunner from our Spartan carefully checks under the lead vehicle to see whether it is already into the minefield. It's not. So the convoy takes a new way into town.
What we're doing is probing forward on one of the roads, one of the main routes which heads towards Basra. Basically, it's the fringes of Basra and Abu al-Qasim out to our right there. So basically, it's just probing forward and clearing any positions. Most of these positions have already been hit by artillery. But like I say, it's just a case of going forward and seeing if there's any further enemy down.
Local residents are conspicuous largely by their absence. There are some, but only the tiny donkey seems impervious to the scenes of devastation all around. One of the vehicles in our convoy spots an Iraqi tank, abandoned but intact, though not for long. 30mm cannon shells burst into the superstructure, and then a Striker edges into position before lifting its firing platform and unleashing a swing-fire, wire-guided anti-tank missile. In just a few seconds, the tank is no longer a threat.
This area is now secured. I suspect now we'll withdraw from this area, hand over any information we've got to the call signs behind us, and then they'll act on that. They're the ones who do the destroying.
In the time we are in the area, there is a steady stream of traffic heading away from Basra. It can surely only be a matter of time before the city falls to the British forces here.
Basra is just a couple of miles down the road from here. These troops from the Queen's Dragoon Guards are the furthest into the city that any coalition force has been so far.
With Baghdad breached and Basra teetering, the war in Iraq may well be entering its final phase. David Bowden, Sky News, on the outskirts of Basra.
The children of Qasr want only one thing.
Water! Water, water!
We toured the town today, besieged everywhere we went by the same demand. As the temperature touched 100 degrees Fahrenheit, water tankers from a nearby pipeline were mobbed by frantic townsfolk. But there simply aren't enough of these lorries to supply everyone. Many have to use this well, hard work in the baking sun, and the brackish water drawn up, not fit for drinking.
There might not be a humanitarian crisis here in Qasr, but there is, as you can see, a desperate shortage of water. And as the temperature gets hotter every day, that need becomes ever more pressing.
In the local hospital, we've found squalid conditions. And once again, the taps weren't working. Not a single drop in the entire building. We found this patient, a young boy with a badly broken arm. The X-ray showing a horrible fracture. Until we'd arrived, there'd been no water to make the plaster cast. We gave them the small amount we had with us, allowing them to set his arm as best they could. Despite the hardship, the hospitality of the local families was undiminished. Over tea, they told me they didn't care what was happening in Baghdad. All they worry about is food and water. Since the war started, the men of the household no longer have jobs.
Well, here's how it's been described to me, Charlie, and that is that the British are not in control of Basra, but they are all over it. And that is broadly true, except for one small corner of the city to the south-east. I went down there earlier today and looked out over the city from an artillery forward observation post. And beyond the smoke that you can see rising from a battle that the